going to go ahead and assume you guys can hear me. And hopefully you can also see my slides. I'm sorry I can't see anything beyond what I have shared on the screen. But as you guys have seen, I am a community migration survivor. And I can only assume if you're joining this session that you too are hoping to be a community migration survivor. So that is our goal for today, is to walk you through some of what to expect to get to that state. And this is the presentation that I wished I could attend a year ago. I knew for a long time that I would have to be responsible for migrating our customer community to a new platform, and it felt really daunting to me. I am a community manager. I'm not the project manager for tech, so it felt like an overwhelming task at the time. And I put a lot of research and legwork in at the front end to try and understand what I need to do to try and prepare myself. And I've got to say, it seems to have worked. So this is me in May and June of this year. And it's not really me. This woman is blonde, and her house is cleaner than mine. But you get the idea. I was at the height of our migration due to when our contract ended and when we needed to go live, at the same time as the height of the coronavirus lockdown in Michigan. So I had two little humans coming on all my meetings, sitting on my lap while I was working, an extra job, and more work than I typically would have as a community manager. And yet, it went pretty well. It went pretty smoothly. Yes, there were some curveballs and surprises, but I was honestly surprised at how calm the whole process was during those final weeks and months of migration. And I credit that to a lot of the prep work that I'm going to walk you guys through today. So I really hope that it helps you as much as it helped me. And this is what it looks like. So we're going to start by talking through some of the basics, and some of this might be boring or repetitive for those of you who have done some of these exercises before. But I'm hoping that you'll bear with me and really get clear on the purpose you're going to keep coming back to and the people that you're going to keep working with. And then we're going to get into the meat of things and talk you through some of what you can expect over the coming weeks or months, depending on what your time scope is, as well as some tools that you are free to screenshot and steal and scribble in. And I'd also love for you guys to use the chat throughout to share with one another as we think through some of these slides together. I unfortunately can't see the chat or the QA while I talk, but I know you can. So I would love to have you guys sharing with one another as we go through the session. And if there's time at the end, I will be more than happy to take questions. So a little bit about my company before we get started, in case I reference something that might otherwise come across as confusing. Our company, Glint, is a people success platform. And what that really means is we're a software company that creates employee engagement surveys, takes feedback from companies' employees, turns it into insights, and also into actions that we recommend organizations take to increase engagement. Our mission is to help employees be happier and more successful at work. And we're actually part of the LinkedIn ecosystem now. So if I do reference LinkedIn at some point, that's what I'm talking about. We don't use LinkedIn as our community platform, but we are a part of LinkedIn. And a little about the Glint community. It's awesome. We have over 20,000 members, and it's part public. So if you want, and I know you do, you can go ahead and Google Glint community and you can poke around. You won't get very far because most of our really good stuff is gated for customers only, but you can get a sense of its look and feel. And we have just the nicest user base because, again, they're people who are focused on engagement at their organizations. So they're really into culture building and all around amazing people. We use the Insighted platform. I love it. We'll get to platform assessment, but I really loved working with them and have loved being on their platform. It really works for our use cases and our needs. And our purpose, and this is where we're going to begin our journey today, is purpose statements, is to help Glint users make people's success a reality in their organization. So that little one-liner took me weeks to put together, and I hope you all have purpose statements, but please don't be embarrassed if you don't. I didn't for a long time. Our community didn't for quite some time. And it's really going to be the foundation of what you do for a migration or redesign. If you don't have a clear purpose, a clear sense of what your community is meant to do right now, then migrating isn't really going to be an improvement for your members. It's just going to be a lift and shift of confusion. So get really clear on what you want to achieve. And as I'm sure you know, we can't talk about purpose without talking about whose purpose. And if you're like me and like our community, there are probably a lot of different people with a lot of different purposes and goals that you have to keep in mind. So we had internal stakeholders, as I'm sure you do, from a bunch of different teams who wanted different and sometimes opposing things. And we also have members, as all communities do, who sometimes want different and opposing things. So how do we as community managers prioritize those people and those needs and those goals and turn them into our sense of purpose? I created this chart, very fancy, as you can see. And you're gonna get really sick of my charts, but hopefully they will help you over the course of this call. So while I talk and blah, 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 I would love for you guys to go ahead and scribble down, type down whatever you want to do to get your thoughts down about departments and teams at your organization, and this is just internal right now, that touch your community, and take a stab at what are the goals that they have for community, and what might the community need from them, or how might they engage with the community in a way that benefits the community. Most importantly, at least I thought this was most important, who can you work with from those teams? Who can be your point of contact? And if you haven't done this before, you don't have to worry about getting it right now. It's just the process of getting started and identifying some stakeholders, groups, and contacts that you can work with over time. So when I did this exercise initially, I actually missed a few teams, and it was fine. You know, like you just pick up and carry on. And we figured out more contacts I needed to work with over time. But this is a simplified version of what I came to early in the process. Here's a team, here's what I think their goal is, what does the community need from them? And then the really key part of this exercise is in the actual asking of the stakeholders. So you've got your who can I work with? You've got hopefully one or two people from each team. Talk to them, reach out, set up a meeting, tell them what you're planning. We're about to do a community migration. Here's what we think you want from the community. Do we have that right? Here's how we think you could participate in the community. Does that make sense? Learn from them what they really need, and most importantly, make them aware of the direction you're going and make sure they understand that you've chosen them to be involved and to help you support this project. So if you take nothing else away, this was maybe the most key thing that I did. And I'll tell you, nothing I did was super purposeful, but a lot of it worked out really well. And having these individuals early on in the process, knowing where I was and where I was going and giving me their perspective was so crucial. And I'll come back to this multiple times through our talk here. So that's just internal, and we haven't done anything to prioritize yet. We've just gotten a giant mess of responses, right? So we also need to talk to our members, and we need to understand what they want and need. And probably all of you have done this, so I'm going to cover it pretty quickly. I actually came at this backwards from how I did internal, and I talked to my members first. So I asked the people who either responded to our NPS surveys about the community or who were on their way to being super users, what are you trying to do? Are you being successful? Are you coming back? What do your stakeholders want to do? What are your roles? And I tried to build personas, or the personas kind of came out of it pretty easily, of who was in the community and why. And again, I built a very similar boring table. Who are the members? Who are the different personas in the community? What are their goals? Does the community need anything from them? And then what's different here is I'd already developed my group of ambassadors or stakeholders that I could talk to. I took what I learned about their goals, and I realized pretty quickly that while we serve all of these different types of users, there's only one type of user that really makes the community, that was coming back and contributing and sharing with one another and being communal. And so those people became pretty immediately my priority, our priority. And while we continue to serve these other personas, we don't let it conflict with or take the focus away from that priority user group. So again, if you want to start scribbling down some ideas of who these people are that your community is serving, or maybe you already know. And then the real key point of this exercise is to try and understand who you're serving first and foremost. So we have our stakeholders, both internal and external, and now we get to put them together into a beautiful shared value chart. And if you haven't heard of shared value in relation to communities, I bet you will hear about it again during the conference this week. It's the idea that communities serve the organizations, and they also serve our users in a really lovely shared way if we do them right. And so the way that I put them together, and mainly just to give you guys a break from a boring table view, is I put together more of a graph. And I started, and I'm sure you can go about this a ton of different ways. The way that I started was with our members. LinkedIn has a tenet, which is members first, so that sticks with me. And I took our primary audience and some of their real key goals. And then I took some of the internal goals that aligned to those, that weren't in opposition to them, and that I felt I was hearing in themes from different teams. And I put them on separate axes. And then this is kind of fun, looking for opportunities. And this is a really simplified view, you guys. I would never publicly share what I really came up with because it was only readable to me, because it looked insane. But there are so many opportunities to look at your different audiences' goals and think about ways that your current or impending community can support them mutually at the intersection of members and business. All of this does not create a purpose statement, but it does inform it. And so for me, I don't know what magic goes into turning this into a one-liner, but this gave me a really good view into what we were trying to do and how we could try to do it with our new platform. And what I ended up creating was this opening slide to our community roadmap. And it starts with our purpose, and it does lay out that shared value, again, in a boring table, I'm sorry. And I also mention our personas so I can give context to anyone who's reviewing this, and some of our different delivery methods. But the point being, I had something, a tool, that when I'm talking to different stakeholders or different members who are questioning the decisions that we make in going through the migration, we have a simple way of pointing back to here's what we're trying to do. And not even just stakeholders and members, but in your own heads, when you're trying to make a decision, always bring it back to, is this going to serve our purpose? So, while I introduce the next session, if any of you do have a purpose statement that you're willing to share in the chat, I think it's really interesting to hear from other community leaders and community managers about what they're trying to achieve with their communities. So if you are comfortable sharing your 1 to 2 lines, even if it's just a work in progress, please do. It's really fun to workshop with one another. So now to kind of the meat of this presentation. And I'm sorry I'm moving very fast. There is a lot to cover because migrations are big work. What I want to do is talk you through some of the different components of being successful. And again, these are all things that you can start doing now if you're weeks or months away from a community migration. These are things that will help you feel prepared and be ready to hit the ground running once you are ready to actually take it into action. So we're going to need buy-in. And I told you I'd come back to that idea of your internal stakeholders and your points of contact. That's really where it starts, is introducing a cross-functional group of contacts to the fact that you are planning a community redesign, migration, stand up, go live, whatever it may be. Letting people across the company know what you're trying to do, making sure you understand what they want to see from it, and letting them know if you can't meet those needs, but that you still want to work with them to continue moving in that direction. That's how you're going to get buy-in, or at least that's how I got buy-in across the organization. It's also how I identified gaps and problems. When you have people who you can work with on a regular basis and who know what you're trying to achieve, they can raise issues that you may not know exist. And that happened more times than I care to admit during our migration process. So what I recommend is for that group of stakeholders, points of contact that you've identified, is to set up a monthly touch base. And you can do that in a big group sometimes. You can do one-on-one sometimes. You can just email if there's not much to discuss or share. But make sure you have a steady cadence of meetings with these people who you've identified as your points of contact. And it'll make sure that you keep your project on track from all different parts of the organization as you go. Assessing vendors. This is a fun part. This is also where I've heard the most questions from people who know I've been through this process. So I'm going to spend a little more time here. You have to know your purpose, again, before you decide which vendors are of interest to you. I called my manager, just like melting down one day, like, do we want a vendor that's really going to be more forum-based? Do we want someone who's going to be more knowledge-based? Do we want a content management system? Is that what we're going for? And again, I had to breathe, think back to our purpose, understand our stakeholders' needs and my own requirements. And then I was able to make some determinations about how to move further. So this is, I'm sure there's many ways. Again, this is how I found some vendors and decided who to move forward with for a deeper review. The Google, great source. So I have some embarrassing search history around community platform vendors and what's the best community platform. I found a lot of vendors that I wouldn't have heard about otherwise by doing G2 comparisons. If you're not familiar with G2, it's sort of a comparison site for different technology companies. I also looked at community sites for other companies and especially competitors. I looked at what some of our competitors were doing. If they had communities that were accessible, I checked them out, tried to see what they looked like, what they felt like, how they operated. And I asked my network for references. We hopefully all have a community manager or two that we know and connect with. Ask what they're using, see how they like it. Once you have a list of vendors that you'd be interested in potentially learning more about, obviously check out their website, see what they offer, see what kind of feeling you get from them. And then I spend a lot of time looking at communities hosted by some of my favorites, just to see like, how consistent is it? How customizable is it? Do I like the way that it operates? If you get a good feeling, set up a demo. Sometimes I just didn't feel it, and that's okay. And then if you get far enough in the process, definitely take them up on talking to references. I actually learned a ton from one of the references I talked to about the migration process itself, and I can't thank him enough. And through it all, know your requirements. So some of this is going to come out of the work you did during your stakeholder assessment and the goals that your different stakeholders need. Some of it is just what you know as a community manager you need. This horrifying chart is actually much longer in Excel, and it's the beginnings of a list that my team put together of what we wanted to see in our new community. I'm going to show you a closer view, more of a sample view, so you can get a sense of how it worked for us. But basically, I built a scorecard. And let me zoom in on it for you. So these are actually some real requirements that we had that I included on this view. But I'd say, just as in any ideation process, throw every requirement you can think of at this thing. Make the list as long as you possibly want, and then filter it out. Get rid of the stuff that, is that really a need to have? Is that really a nice to have? And when you've weaned your list down a little bit, give it a weight. Talk to different stakeholders about, is this non-negotiable for you? For example, security for us, non-negotiable. We couldn't be approved if we didn't have the right security. And then based on what comes out as your top weighted items, I suggest filtering it, or not filtering, but sorting it so you can see at a glance what is meeting your top rated items most consistently. I had a little fun with our key, and you gotta have a little fun during the migration process. It'll keep you sane, especially if you're locked down with 2 little kids. So take a minute, think about some of the requirements that you know are non-negotiable for you, or that you think are non-negotiable for you. Maybe it's price, maybe it just needs to be affordable, or maybe you really don't need very much, just 1 or 2 things. That's okay too. Make it as long or as short as you feel comfortable with, and then talk to your stakeholders about what is non-negotiable for them and you. Once you're doing the demos, fill it out, and you'll be able to, at a glance, again, kind of see what's really meeting your needs the most. Also, let me back up. One other thing, one note on that. Remember your intuition. When it came right down to it, at the end of our time, we were between a couple vendors who are all about equal, and it came down to who's got the heart share. And I think that there's nothing wrong with going sentimental when you're selecting your vendor. So just keep that in mind. All right, you're gonna need time. So if you're a month or 2 out from when you have to migrate or redesign your site and you haven't done any of this, it can still be done, but it will be much more stressful. So absolutely get going now on your stakeholder assessment and talking to your people. What was recommended to me early on was to plan 90 days for the migration itself and 120 days for the process in its entirety. And that ended up being pretty much on the nose. We started our vendor assessments, our stakeholder assessments, all of that, probably about 6 months before our go live needed to happen. And it needed to happen. We were on a contract. And then we were a little under 90 days because of how long it took to get security approvals for the actual migration itself. And that was mildly stressful. So I do recommend getting as much time as you can. It will just help you handle curveballs so much more smoothly and calmly. Curveballs like a pandemic, I don't know. So do try to give yourself time. But again, if you're past that and you need to go, do what you can. You know, like, don't beat yourself up. We are where we are. We're going to need a plan. So again, if you're 2 months out and you're freaking out, this is for you. This was actually a part of the process that was really daunting for me. Again, I'm a community manager. I have some project planning experience, but not of this scope. So what worked really well for me was to create a really broad plan based on calculating out, here's how far down the road our project needs to go live. Here's the date today. What milestones do I know we need to meet? And I learned those milestones from talking to some references, from talking to other people who've gone through migrations. And I just put these really broad milestones in a very basic project plan. And then as I got closer to the go live, I set up insane looking weekly project plans. I will show you both. Please don't laugh too hard at the insane looking project plans or take screenshots. Absolutely take a screenshot of this and add to it, take away from it as you see fit. I think some of these tasks and project areas are really applicable for anyone going through this process. Whether you use this approach to how you want to set up your timeline, totally up to you, but I saw something similar to this when I was in my planning phase and I clung to it just desperately because, again, I didn't know what to expect. So hopefully this helps you have a sense of some things to expect. And then if not, don't worry, you're going to figure it out as you go. And I know that sounds crazy, but you will discover what needs to get done as it comes time. And when that happens, that's where I suggest creating a plan, whether it looks like this or not, because this, again, looks kind of insane. It really helped me to have a very clear day-by-day, week-by-week to-do list, along with who we needed to support each part of the project, just to make sure we were covering all of our bases. So again, I'm going to go back to this one. If this is helpful for you to take a screenshot or a copy of, please do. If any of you on the line have been through a project migration of this sort and want to suggest some additional tasks or project areas in the chat, please absolutely do. I could be missing some things that are really important and compelling. And support. And I made a special note here about moral support because that is also huge. So I'm a team of one, and as I've already told you, we hit our go live right around the same time as coronavirus lockdown in my area. So with that came economic uncertainty and a hiring freeze at my company, which meant that we could not hire the hoped for contractor that we had always imagined was going to support me through this process. That could have been awful, but I had fabulous moral support from my manager, who is the best in the world. She not only welcomed my kiddos being on every meeting we had, no matter if it was with executives or contractors or what, and also set up extra meetings with me to make sure that I was doing okay, both with the project, but also well-being. And I can't stress enough how important that is to have someone in your corner going through something that's maybe new or scary to you. What she also did was came up with a really creative way that we could get actual support. So we ended up buying a bunch of hours from basically a migration service or a community consultancy service. They were wonderful. Typically they provide more strategic and project management support, but they also jumped in with every little thing that we needed help with. So loading videos and adding translations and editing posts. So it ended up working out, even though it was a little stressful to get there. If you're having trouble getting the buy-in for the support you need, this is an exercise that I recommend. And I ended up doing this just so we knew what to give to other people once we did have that bucket of hours. So I took all the tasks I could think of that I did day to day before the migration. And we assume that's going to take, if you're a community manager, 100% of your time. So what during the project doesn't have to be done? Surely there are some things that you can put on hold. I put events on hold. That was a huge part of my time as our community manager. And so we put a freeze on events for a couple months. And then what can we outsource, whether it's to another team or a contractor or whatever it may be, and try to calculate what percentage of time you'll have left over to devote to migration tasks. Then do the same thing with what you expect coming in the migration and redesign. And think about, too, what skills do you have and what skills are you lacking? And be honest, if I had tried to take on setting up single sign-on, it wouldn't have gone well. I'm not an engineer. I don't have those technical skills. So be really clear in how you present this, what you want to own and what you can and can't own. And then offer some ideas of teams within your company or within the vendor. We used our vendors Insighted's migration services, their professional services to actually perform some of the migration, or a third party like the consultancy that we ended up using. If you do this and share it upline or with that group of stakeholders that you work with, it will show them where you can and can't actually make this successful. And hopefully everyone at your company understands the importance of making your migration or redesign or go live successful. So what it does is it will help you get that buy-in to either hire, support with additional team time within your company, or get a consultancy to help support you. But support is crucial. This is a project, and you have full-time jobs, I assume, to do already. And ongoing feedback. If we want it to be successful for our stakeholders and our members, we need to ask them how it's going. And we need to do that throughout. So again, start now, understand your users' goals, understand your internal stakeholders' goals, and then keep asking them throughout the project. And this is a list of things that I tried, some with more success than others. I'm sure there's other really great ways to do user testing and to ask for feedback. So member forums, pretty simple. Have some of your super users or ambassadors on a call to talk to them and ask them what they want to see, what they want different, what they want the same. Follow Me Home is an exercise that I really love, where you ask a user to perform a certain task, and then you watch them do it. It's kind of a creepy name. Maybe we could call it something else. But you watch how they perform that task and see if it's actually workable with the way that you have the user experience set up. I didn't know how to name this either, so I called it Super User Free Reign Before Go Live. And what that meant was I invited a few of our customer members who I've worked with and really trust to join the community, the new community, before it was live and poke around and just let me know what they thought. That allowed them to test out different user experiences that maybe I wouldn't have thought of, and just see if it was working and met their needs. Choose your own adventure stories. That's more about coming up with, in your mind, what are all the different ways a user could access the community? What are all the different ways a user could search? And trying to write that out as a short story. Or a diagram. What are the different branches that our users could go on in this new design, in this new community? For internals, again, I really, for them, just focused on stakeholder progress updates on a monthly and then eventually bi-weekly and weekly basis. And they were not hesitant to raise issues and let me know what they thought and give feedback. And that brings me to the special point of unasked for feedback. I think I might have had a slide out of order here. Unasked for feedback. Really, really helpful. So welcome it. Don't be afraid of it. You don't know what you don't know, and you shouldn't be embarrassed if someone raises something you don't know. You're a community manager. You're not on the engineering team. You're not on the product management team. It's okay if someone raises something. Try to not be defensive. That's hard for me. I put so much effort into the planning that I don't want to feel like someone is questioning it. But if you take a second, take a deep breath, let those defenses down, it will really help not only with the end result, but also in building trust across teams, and that's huge. And finally, trust yourself. Even if you welcome feedback and aren't defensive about it, do keep in mind that you have spent more time with this baby than anyone else. You've put the work in. My manager kept telling me that, and I was so grateful to her. You've put the work in. You know what you know. So go with your heart sometimes, and you don't need to take every piece of feedback at equal value. So another beautiful chart for us to spend a few minutes with. If you're at a moment where user testing is something you're ready to do, feel free to take some time with this right now and think about, what are the things that I want to ask participants who are going to participate in one of these different types of user testing? What are the experiences I most want to understand? For me, login was huge. I spent hours and days slaving over, what is the login experience like? What are different login experiences like? What are the questions we're trying to answer and why? And how can we mock these experiences up for our users? And finally, and an important one, what are the participants getting from this? Is it just a sneak peek? That might be enough. Are we going to let them present to other users, do training for them? Definitely something to think about. Why are people participating? What do they want out of it? So again, feel free to take a screenshot. I would attach this to the presentation if I could for you guys, so you could write on these while we talk. Now, this is the disappointing part of the presentation, and I know it, but I can't tell you what your migration will look like or what your redesign go live will look like. I can't tell you what to put on those day-by-day, week-by-week plans because I don't know. Your vendor is going to be different. Your support is going to be different. Your community's purpose is different. Everything about your migration is going to be unique. It's a black box. But I think if you put this work in at the front end that we've talked through today, if you do the actual work in advance, then you can trust yourself to surface these things as they come. Put a lot of stock in the support you get. I can't thank our vendor Insighted enough for the migration that they walked us through. They did all the technical work and they were so calm and supportive throughout the process. Hopefully you have the same experience. But if you start these things on the front end, what we need to succeed, the stakeholder buy-in, the vendor assessment, the timeline, the project planning, the support, and the user testing, this is going to set you up so that you can handle those last-minute curveballs of being stuck at home with 2 toddlers while you go live. And I think it will help make you successful. It certainly helped me feel much more comfortable with what I was going through. So I'm going to leave you with this quote, and then I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully take some questions and see what you guys have shared with one another in the chat. I'm really pleased that I powered through this because I thought I might take up the whole hour. So taking the time to build community, to get to know your people will have a long-lasting benefit. And I truly believe that. Clifton Talbert actually created school communities. And I just loved this quote. It felt like exactly what I experienced in the migration process. So with that, let's see if we have any questions. Sorry, I'm trying to work the chat here. We have a question, what was my previous platform? So we actually were on the Jive platform, or JX, which is now owned by Koros. And the reason we moved is that they were sunsetting that platform. So we had a really nice experience with them. What things do we wish we had known when we first started on a new platform? That's a great question. I honestly felt like the work that I talked you through kind of got us off on the right foot on the new platform. One thing I didn't cover that we spent a lot of time on was our change management and communications plan. So when we went live with the new platform, we spent a lot of time doing walkthroughs with our executives, walkthroughs with our customer-facing teams, and then walkthroughs with customers themselves to make sure that they felt good. And we definitely had some bumps. I talked about login. We had to do some issues with login, but it wasn't something I wish I had known. I think knowing our purpose and our people made all the difference. And if we could do anything again differently within our control, what would it be? Well, this is very specific to me and our team. It took me a long time to realize that the platform decision was mine. I spent a long time assessing platforms and sort of waiting for someone to say, here's what we're going to do. And one day I was like, oh, here's what we're going to do. So I wish I had done that sooner. And the reason is it took forever to get security approvals. So that's one of those give yourself as much time as you can learnings, because it took us months to get security approval. And when we finally did and got the contract, we were already within that 90-day window. So know your power and yeah, give yourself time. Our comms planning for our members versus our beta testers. Great question. So I'm kind of from a comms background, and one thing is always communicate internally first and then communicate with customers so that when your customers inevitably ask their contacts questions, your contacts feel prepared and empowered. So our full comms plan started with an announcement internally, working with our stakeholders as well to make sure they could tweak that messaging for their functions. And then I communicated with our customers, did an initial announcement. Oh, and this is something I highly recommend for legal purposes. We had to give customers 60-day notice, and I did not know that. But fortunately, I had announced it well before that time frame, just that it was something coming. So that kind of covered our you-know-whats. And then I just did a very regular cadence of communication with our members. I emailed them regularly. I communicated it in the community itself on events, and then sent our customer-facing teams a lot of communications to share with their clients and kept a running list of FAQs. How did it go in the hours and days after deployment? What kind of celebration did we do? I was walking on clouds, but also like terrified that something was going to go wrong because it went too smoothly. So I went for a long walk without my kids, and that felt like a celebration. And then I stayed glued to my computer waiting for issues. We did have some issues with password resets that we never fully figured out, but we were able to, a few weeks later, set up single sign-on. So that really abated it. And it was never like a deal breaker. It just was a lot of manual troubleshooting. That was the only issue, was this password reset issue. And other than that, we had thought through a lot of potential problems, and still, you know, with everyone's community to this day, I'll get feedback and have trouble. I just had a meeting about our search isn't functioning as well as we want it to. So how do we improve the search? But as far as a go live, it was so smooth. We do not integrate our community with our CRM. We desperately want to. We're still working through security on that one. Big company, a lot of security that we have to get through. But I think it's great if you can integrate your community with your CRM. Do it. It will make for such nice metrics and give your customer-facing teams a real boost into what their contacts are doing. And speaking of metrics, how did you think about metrics as you moved to your new community? We thought about it a ton. We still do. So it was actually pretty tough to think about because we didn't fully know what kind of analytics we would have available to us. We had a sandbox, but it didn't give us much data because we didn't have any members or activity in it. And I'm still working on metrics. That's one of the things I want to get out of this conference is what are other people doing. But a huge one for us, and again, going back to purpose, is how many of our customers are active in our community. Someone saw my cat. In any given month, because what that's telling us is that our customers are taking advantage of information in some way. So we always hope that more than 50% of our customers have someone, at least one person, active. And then we keep an eye on repeat visits. We keep an eye on engaged versus participatory. So who's posting versus who's just lurking and reading. I think both are important. And many others, but those are, I think, some of the key ones right now. We also have a lot of metrics around our events, which I'm happy to say we've restarted now that I have my life back. My cat, I have two, George and Liffy, and I thought they were both on the porch, but I'm glad one of them got a cameo. Our new community has been live since the end of June, and I still, every day that I log into it, feel so excited. I love it and have heard pretty much entirely good things from our user base and our internal stakeholders as well, beyond the everyday improvements that we're trying to make. Surprises or differences between the company and community values that we discovered. That's a really great question and gets at that whole foundational piece of stakeholder assessment. I guess the biggest was there were definitely people at my company who wanted the community to be more of a marketing tool. And we've in some ways made it that way by making it part public to meet those needs. But again, our focus is really meant to be supporting our post-purchase customers to be successful. So that's where we're putting most of our effort. And I don't fault anyone who sees a community as being a marketing tool. It often is. I think that's a really important use case for communities. But just given who our primary members are and what they want, it didn't make sense for us to focus there. And we have a website and we have a LinkedIn community. So I was able to work with the marketing team to get really clear on what we were going to do as far as marketing and what we were going to do on those other sites. And they were totally bought into it. And most of the people who wanted it used in that way were on other teams and just not really understanding the community's purpose. So I think we've gotten pretty good alignment on that front. Were we able to migrate content from our previous platform? Yes. Did we have discussion board content in our ideation? So yes, we were, and I think most communities, this is standard with migration. How you do that will be up to you and the support that you get. Sorry, just reading ahead on questions. So like I said, Insighted, our platform vendor, did the migration for us. It was a extra professional services fee. They were wonderful. I had to work as the go-between between our previous community vendor to get a data file download, and then they were able to get into that data file, did a bunch of engineering that was way over my head and built it out in a staging environment. A lot of it was really messed up. They did a lot of work to clean it up, to fix it up. I did a ton of work to really make it the way I wanted. That was like a 2 to 3 week period of making it really look the way we wanted. And then they pushed that into the live environment. I know some people don't use their platform vendor to do that data migration. They might use a consultancy service, or they might have the tech skills to do it themselves. But I think most communities are able to migrate from one to the other. What if engagement totally dies? I don't know. I think as community managers, it is our job to continue to infuse that engagement with life. And so I will tell you, there was a little bit of a pause, a little bit of a dip, even for my community, as people, I think, were a little shy about using the new platform, a little nervous, like, is this public? I don't want my question to be public. How do I post? But I, in my job, really look for people who have good stories, invite them to tell it, work with them to tell it, invite them to ask questions, invite our customer teams to tell their customers to post those questions. And then over time, it builds on itself. And it definitely picked back up for us. And if you want to reach out to me, I can give you some tips on what I do if I notice engagement is low. But if your community is strong, it should withstand a migration, especially if you communicate that it's coming and why. Did we see generational difference in the understanding expectation? That's a great question. I don't know necessarily the generations within our membership. So I'd say most of the people that I work with are within a 10 to 20 year gap, and the super users before continue to be the super users, and I didn't see any generational differences there. Oh, unless you're asking about like internal and how internally people understood what we were doing with the community. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood that. So internal, it wasn't generational, I wouldn't say, but there were some differences in maybe functions and levels of seniority in the organization. I'd say the further removed people were from my level, the less they understood what we were trying to do with community. And it wasn't that they didn't buy into it. I had support the whole way through, but there was a lot of like kind of questioning about, again, our purpose and our goals. And I think that's mostly just a matter of how close they are to the community versus all of the many, many other things that they're overseeing. But no, I didn't see really any age differences in people's excitement about or interest in the community. I'd be interested if other people are experiencing that. Let me see, it looks like since we have launched, is leadership more interested? I think they would be. The timing was interesting in so many ways because not only was lockdown at its peak and coronavirus freaking us all out as much as it is now, we also had a pretty major organizational shift right around that same time where we more integrated with LinkedIn, and our current leadership kind of shifted and stepped off. I would say that different teams are more interested in the community now, and I credit that to the really regular cross-functional stakeholder meetings that I held during the process. But I wouldn't say leadership of those teams is necessarily more or less engaged. Great question. All right, and I don't see any other notes in the chat unless I'm looking at the session in general chats incorrectly. How has the pandemic impacted our post-release? For example, with improving search, how has that discussion looked after changing work methods? I don't fully understand that question. How has the pandemic? Oh, I see. Okay, I see what you mean. So, sorry, release is something that our company does as well that I'm pretty involved in. Gotcha. Great question. So probably, well, definitely for us, because again, we're all about employee engagement. The pandemic really boosted engagement on the community before our migration, because all of these people who manage employee engagement at their organizations were reaching out to each other, trying to understand what one another are doing to help support their employees through the madness. So when our new community went live, some of that picked back up, but it was sort of like it coincided with a return to normal, even though nothing is totally normal. People were ready to start talking about the things that they had talked about before, but engagement stayed very strong. So the people who did start to engage during the pandemic, I have noticed showing up more in the community. Does that help? Sorry if I'm still misunderstanding. Okay, awesome. All right, any more questions? We have a few more minutes. It's so fun. I'm glad so many of you are on this journey. It can be really daunting, but also really rewarding. And I did put together all of those charts and tools that I showed you into like a packet. So if you want that as something, some worksheets to work through, yeah, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share that. Any tips for other teams of one out there? Go teams of one. Embrace it. It's great to be able to really make your own decisions, but really look for that support. I was so lucky to have my manager through this. She was so in my corner, and her manager was so in our corner. And so try, if your manager is not, try your best to find someone in sort of a mentorship role who can advocate for you, or just talk you down when you're feeling stressed out, and help you think of creative solutions. You don't have to be asking them to do the work, but just to give you a listening ear and that moral support and maybe some leverage within the company. All right, so Megan, unless I'm missing something in the general and session chats, I think that is it. And we have a couple more minutes. So if there's one more question, I absolutely welcome it.
Hey, Brigid.
Hello.
Okay, so that was our last workshop of the day. We do have 2 more minutes, so you're welcome to just hang around here and ask Brigid a couple more questions. But we also have a juggling workshop in a different stage, not the day, for anyone that wants to join that. But otherwise, you can hang out here for just a couple more minutes, and we will see you all tomorrow.
Awesome. Ballpark budgets for community software. Oh man, they measure in different ways, I learned. So some are based on membership, some are based on estimated visits. Ours, I think, is estimated visits or session views. And I saw anything from low end like 30,000 to high end 200,000. Wait, no, that's too high, 100,000. those high ones are probably pretty negotiable. And we were fortunate to be on the lower end, which is always a plus. But it also depends on like add-ons. So you might want extra admin seats or migration support, or for example, we turned on a couple of integrations that cost a little extra. So good question, but yeah, it's all over the place. Yeah, exactly. Thank you guys. It was fun talking you through all of this. And yeah, I hope to see you on sessions further down in the conference later this week. So nice to virtually meet you all. Thank you for listening to me talk about my experiences, and I really hope it was helpful. Have a great evening and afternoon.